Let's talk about that race and race consciousness and racism and anti-racism. These are all big topics that have been in the public consciousness for I don't know, half a decade or a little bit more at this point. And let me just break it down a little bit. When we were trying to figure things out, we just got together. We were expecting our first child, and we subscribed. We were like, let's subscribe to some journals. Back before everything was completely online. It's crazy how that happened so fast. But we had these journals that were sent to us, and one of them was The Nation, and it had a big advertisement for this book called Stamped from the Beginning: The History of Racist Ideas in America, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. So I thought, that looks really interesting. So I bought it. It's a big old book, and I went through it, and I really enjoyed it because in that book, Kendi had me look at race in a different way than I'd ever thought. I don't think I'd ever heard the term anti-racism at that point, but I'd always thought of myself in that regard as like, I don't want that. I've always enjoyed people of different perceived races my entire life, and it was modeled to me by my father. It was always a positive thing for me. I didn't see things the way I heard a lot of other people talk about race. And so I'm always excited to learn more about it and find different ways to understand it. And the thing that pushed me forward is he's saying look, race doesn't exist in the way that we look at it in America and in the world. It was constructed. Well, let me back up a little bit further. I think I would have said at that point that, race was created because, through slavery and whatnot, and people grew not to like black people, and then they had these ideas and whatever. But Kendi was saying look, no, it was more deliberate than that. There was people that were slave drivers, and they needed to justify it, and they needed the people to look away, and the only way to do that was to dehumanize them so that people would look at themselves as better and whatnot. And so they created, it didn't even exist before, in that far in history. People didn't even talk about race like that. They didn't look at it like that. But so they created all these categories and slid them into it. And of course, other people used it for power. Other people wrote about things and whatnot. But the idea that it was a construct, a power construct that we constructed, that made sense to me, and I appreciated learning about that in the history of it. But as I went further and further on it, I feel like it is a snake eating its own tail. So I'm supposed to be anti-racist, but a lot of the things that Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo is another person that's in the anti-racism, they're prescribing racism in a way by telling us that it's always the predominant factor of somebody. And so we're pushing to the side things like a content of someone's character, the relationship that you have with them, all of these things, and the race goes first. But if race doesn't exist, for example, biologically, it doesn't exist, then, and people created it as a power construct, then I understand why they're saying that we should do these things. But in the same sense, it doesn't make sense because I'm trying to look at race less, but you're telling me that it needs to be the predominant factor in all situations. And then the other part of it I would have a problem with is the overgeneralization. So in their anti-racism movement, when you're talking about, so white people would be the people in power, which is generally true. I'm not denying that and have abused that. And black people would be on the bottom. That's true in so many senses in the way that it's been, peddled in America since the beginning of America. But on the other hand, that would say a homeless white guy had power and Obama didn't, for example. And I know that would be the most egregious case of it. But there's lots of little things and middle things, you could have somebody who's a black individual that grew up in a nice family with with good parents that looked after them, that talked to them, that cared for them. And you could have a white person that was sexually abused and beaten and poor. And so always in all circumstances, placing the hierarchy that way, to me, is the snake eating its own tail. And it's actually setting in stone for example, the most famous civil rights speech ever, right, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talking about how the color of our skin will matter no less than the color of our eyes, and what we'll focus on is the content of one's character. But we're not doing that. And I understand, because I went through I bought into it first, but I don't want to look at, I don't want to see you, Jerome, and I think the first thing, assume things and think that you're this way, or that you think this, or you feel this, or this was your experience because of the color of your skin. It very well may be, and very many people may have went through that experience, But, you know, even I think you could speak to this as well. You're a great example because a lot of times when she's hearing conversations or people are talking to me about Alicia, they can't understand that she's black, but she's not African American and didn't descend from that. You still descended through slavery, but not in the context of America, of the United States of America. And so they seem unable to wrap their head around that, like it's the only way that it can be. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I don't want to generalize. And for me, what I believe in my heart and my intellect at this point tells me that, yes, there are cultural differences that are often the case between people of perceived races, for sure. And if there's differences, absolutely. Different life experiences. But I don't want to generalize. I don't want to assume that this about you. I want to get to know you for who you are as a human being. And also, you know, I'm going to pass this on just a second. But one other, you know, where I've come up in social media where people have attacked me a few times is they're saying basically that you're a white guy and you shouldn't even be talking about this or this or that. And I'm thinking, well, you guys are saying that white is bad and you're telling me to only be white. And I don't identify with any of that stuff. So you're asking me to be somebody I'm not. And you're asking me not to care about anything else in the world, but I don't look at it that way. Now, I get it that things can be appropriated, for example. You know, people have appropriated like the term aloha, for example, and tried to get it patent for themselves. I get that's stealing something that's not yours. On the other hand, I don't aim to steal anything. When we talk about, like, let's say Rastafari, I'm not trying to steal nothing from them. I'm trying to learn from them because I feel they have something that they know and they understand that I need to grow on. And so I'm listening to you, to the Rastafarians, to the Rastafari culture, to the belief system, and I'm trying to grow myself. We had somebody, we were doing an event at the park, and remember the woman was attacking me because I had mentioned that we were having a talking circle, and we were going to talk about yoga and meditation. And she went off about how I had no right to talk about, to be leading things on this. And I was like, I'm not trying to lead anything. I'm trying to have a conversation to see if yoga can help us in here and meditation can help us in some way and try to understand it better. And so I think this anti-racism movement as it's become today, the mainstream anti-racism movement, I think that it unintentionally divides us and it makes everyone look at everyone and say, well, they might be thinking about this. And even me, I found myself like, being in a space with a black person that I don't know, and I start thinking like, I hope they don't think this about me. But I never thought that way before. I thought that they would, because I'd never experienced that. No black person has ever treated me that way. They've always treated me like they got to know me, you know. And I don't know every black person in the world, but that's one reason why I've always gravitated towards black people, because everyone that I've ever come in contact and had a relationship with me judged me for who I was, if that makes sense. And so I appreciated that. And obviously I'm going to be drawn to that as a different type of person. But maybe you can speak and then we'll pass it over to Jerome.
Yeah.
You know, your experiences, because you have a unique situation as well. You grew up in a white community of one of the only, you know, non-white folks in a small island in the UK. But at the same time, your dad is 2 generations removed from Jamaica. So
right. There's so many things buzzing in my head. The first thing I'm thinking is coming to America from the UK, it highlighted that race is such a social construct because there's a lot of similarities, yes, between the UK and America, but there's a lot of differences as well. And so the way I was portrayed when I arrived in America was very different from my experience growing up, especially on the islands of the Isle of Man and Guernsey, Channel Islands. But also going to college in Essex, just outside of London, it's just different. And it's really hard for me to put my finger on it. I think coming to America, there was that thing of African American. It was really hard to get my head around why everyone kept calling me African American. Because growing up, I had associated myself with Jamaica, and so Caribbean, obviously British. I wasn't American in any way. And so it was so hard for me to understand why people kept identify me in that way. And I had so many just interesting interactions with people where obviously that was what they first saw. They saw I had my curly afro at that point. they thought African American. A nurse once said to me, "Wow, you talk so well for a black person." And it was the weirdest comment I'd ever heard in my life. And another comment that stuck with me for so long was there was two people I was working with at Juvenile Justice, and they were trying to guess which of my parents was black. And when they were like, your mom is definitely white, they were like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense in terms of how I speak, which is just because I have a British accent. I don't speak, it's just very interesting how everything is constructed. And then our experiences are based on that construction that's come out of politics, the hierarchies that have been constructed, media, all of that. And so, yeah, just very interesting experiences. And then just backtracking a little bit and talking about the unity and, seeing people for who they are and humanity. I think that's why I've been so drawn to Rastafari, not just because of my roots in Jamaica, but because of that. When we listen to reggae music and we hear, it's not purely about Black power, and it's not solely about that. It's more so about unity, about love, about breaking down the divisive walls, about coming together and judging ourselves as one. And like Haile Selassie says that too, right? About judging ourselves, our skin color being as important as the color of our eyes. We don't say, oh no, Alicia, the one with the brown eyes. No one ever really says that, right? It's dreadlocks or the black lady. It's, yeah, when we get to that point where we can break down those walls. And I think that is why intentionally reggae music is not high up in the, mainstream charts and, pushed by the powers that be, because it specifically highlights and encourages us to see each other as humans. Ziggy Marley's song, I Am a Human. I'm not a what, I'm a who. It's all of this is what reggae teaches us and what Rastafari values teach us as well, and Rastafari culture. And yeah, that's what's drawn me to Rastafari. And so I think I don't know if I even answered any question, but that those are the things that were buzzing in my head from what you were talking about social constructs and
you did.
Unity.
You answered it great. And I think, before I turn it over to Jerome, that people in America don't, not everyone, but a lot of people don't understand Bob Marley for this simple fact, is that they can see him as a black man, which separates them from themselves here for a lot of people, but they can't see him as anything but that, if that makes sense. They can't see him as outside of that. So that was a very, obviously, if you listen to him, it's a very important element of who he was and what he was talking about. But there was so much more. And the very, you mentioned it's Rastafari, named after Rastafari, a.k.a. Haile Selassie. His number one comment ever is what? You were just reading it.
What about skin and eye color?
About the eye color.
Yeah, and I had the quote in my head and I can't remember exactly
I think
how
I actually
said it.
misquoted Martin Luther King and included that in there when I said that earlier about but it's the religion is named after a man who didn't believe in race at all. So you can go with that. That doesn't make sense how a lot of people perceive it. And you remember that one time, I won't say any names, but somebody we were with was telling somebody that was white, like, Bob Marley's not for you. You don't understand that. Bob Marley's not for you. And I was like,
the most false statement.
Yeah, you obviously don't
in the world.
You don't understand. He would, yeah. Trust me, he wanted everybody to listen to his music, and he wanted to bring the unity of everybody.
Hence why he traveled and spread the word, the music.